I'm Kara Powell, and I work with the great team at the Fuller Youth Institute and Fuller Seminary. I'm coming to you right from my office. You can see I have all these books behind me. No, I haven't read all of them, but I've read most of them. And I'm so glad that I get to have a great conversation with a friend who I respect dearly, Reggie Joiner. So Reggie is the CEO and founder of ReThink Ministries. But more than that, he is someone who is passionate about Jesus, passionate about the church, a wonderful dad to 4 young adult children, 2 of whom have just gotten married recently, and a great husband to Debbie. And Reggie, you know, I have described you as someone who is so creative and so incredibly generous with your ideas. I've even said about you that you are generous to a fault. You are that generous in your kingdom perspective. And Reggie's book, Think Orange, you can tell that I have read it multiple times, underlined a lot, highlighted a lot. I'm actually using it in a class starting in a few weeks here at Fuller on adolescent faith longevity. This is one of the required textbooks because I really want Fuller students and leaders overall to understand Reggie and his team's vision for Orange. So, Reggie, thanks so much for being here on the webinar.
Well, it's good to be here, and I'm excited about just hanging out and talking.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about how to partner with parents and some of the misconceptions that we as leaders have about parents. And I was reflecting as I was driving to Fuller today just on my last 48 hours of parenting. So, which is like such a roller coaster, right? So my kids are 14 in 3 days. Okay. And 11 and 8 and a half. She will make it very clear. And Sunday night we had a baptism ceremony for my son and our 11-year-old. So our 2 oldest. You know, we did 6 weeks of preparation. It was just a beautiful sticky faith moment with about 70 friends and family in our backyard, complete with taco truck, communion. I mean, it was just awesome. So, you know, Sunday, this incredible high. And then this morning, my 2 daughters, the 8 and the 11-year-old, they get into this conflict over whether we should leave for school at 8:05 or 8. And, you know, like that 5 minutes became just this source of huge angst. And I'm getting enmeshed in it, and I'm thinking, I've got to get in a headspace to talk about family ministry with Reggie Joiner, and here I am, you know, embroiled in this conflict over 5 minutes. So I think parenting is just one of the hardest jobs on the planet. And so, Reggie, help us understand what are some misconceptions that we as leaders have about the parents of our students?
Well, I think one of the things when I work with staff members or youth leaders around the country is most of those who enter into ministry, and I don't know what percentage of student pastors are in their 20s and early 30s, are not even at a stage of parenting where they necessarily understand parenting. Yeah. And so I think one of the misconceptions is that you know what it's like to be a parent. And I work with student pastors all the time that will say, okay, and they're at least self-aware enough to go, I've never been a parent, I'm trying to lead parents, so what do I do with that? I think that's the beginning of making sure that you at least admit that there's some information that you need that parents have that you may not have. Mm. And I think that applies also to a misconception as it relates to understanding if you are a parent and you're in student ministry, what it means to have a parent at that stage of life. Like you've got a 14-year-old, 11-year-old, and an 8-year-old, you know, to kind of anticipate what it's going to be like to have a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old. At least you've covered a lot of the phases. Yeah. It's interesting when I meet a lot of student pastors or even teachers as they're trying to work and connect with parents, they either have really young children so they don't really understand the dynamic that changes in the home when kids become teenagers. And to understand that phase is important as well. I was actually doing an interview with some teachers of the year. We're doing this big project called the Phase Project. And it was really interesting because in the conversation there was this one moment when these high school teachers of the year and counselors, just amazing thinkers, started wrestling with their frustrations with parents of teenagers and as it relates to boundaries and social media and a number of different things. And they just kind of, for a few moments, got off on parents. And so I let them go for a while, and then I kind of said, okay, how many of you actually have teenagers? And nobody raised their hand. And it was just this moment of, again, for them, because they were smart, where they went, oh yeah, we've never really been there, we don't know what it's like. So I think that's another misconception, to assume that you know what it's like. Then I think there are some other things that we should assume too, that especially when we're thinking parents are disengaged or they're not doing what we want them to do, I think we assume they have the information, that we've communicated information in the right way, that they know who in our church to connect with and how to connect. So there's some practical things as a leader that we shouldn't just assume, and because we'll make an assumption that they are not connecting or doing or participating in the strategy, but the reason why may be a different reason than what we really have assumed.
Well, that's such a good point, and you and I in our conversations over the last years, we've talked about how often we believe the worst about parents instead of really believing the best about them and being pro.
It helps being a parent and having some of those moments like you had this morning to go, you know what, parenting is hard.
Yeah, absolutely. In our new book, The Sticky Faith Guide for Your Family, we had a chance to interview over 50 amazing parents and do the deepest dive we've ever done in terms of what it takes to really encourage parents and the practical ideas that parents need to build sticky faith. And one of the ideas that you've really helped me understand, as well as the churches in our Sticky Faith cohorts here at FYI, is the value of helping parents take one step forward. And this has been kind of mind-blowing for me in our conversation. So will you share with everyone, what do you mean by kind of those incremental steps or helping parents take one step forward?
Well, I think it kind of starts with a simple assumption that we should make about every parent. Even if it seems idealistic, it's just healthier for every student pastor to act like every parent can't do everything, but every parent really wants to get this right, and every parent wants to do something more. And sometimes we tend to overwhelm them with too much expectation or too much content or information or too much activity that we expect them to do. But I honestly believe that when we look at every parent as a parent who wants to do this right, that it kind of changes our perception and it changes the way we treat them. And then if we back off from that and go, okay, if every parent really does want to get this right, then it's important to think in terms of where parents are in levels of partnership so that we can move them from one stage to the next stage in a way that makes sense for them, in a way that can move at their speed, and in a way, ultimately, I think that will help them, win.
So what are those particular steps of partnership? I know you've identified a handful of them that you think are most clear and important for us to understand.
Well, I think, and these are just labels and terms that we've used. You can use any terms you want to use, but for us it helped by putting each kind of group of parents in a bucket. We started off with a bucket we would label the word aware. We would say that every parent inside or outside of the church is at least, and this is going to sound profound, I know, at least is aware they are a parent. In other words, they recognize that they have a responsibility as a parent, and so I think it's, again, just important to lean into all parents and go, every parent knows they're a parent, and every parent knows that this is an important responsibility. The second label that we would put on a bucket and put a group of parents in would be the word involved, because we think there are a number of parents who are involved, and by the word involved, we simply mean that some parents of that big, gigantic aware group have decided to be involved in your church. And for the church leader, this is important because you need to identify and know the parents that are coming or the parents whose kids are coming, and so they're to some degree involved in your church. Now, there's a fourth category, and I'm going to skip the third category for a reason, because if I get people to write this on a piece of paper, I want them to write the word aware, the word involved, and skip a space and write the word invested. The invested parent are the few parents that become invested in your ministry, invested in a deep way in their kids' lives. It's kind of in their DNA. They just do this naturally. They know how to lead well. They know how to parent well, and they're extremely passionate about this. And the reason I put that as the last category is because I like to joke with leaders to say, you will probably never have most of your parents in that category. There will always be a few, and that sometimes as a leader, our goal is to try to get every parent to become an invested parent. And that's why we've got the gap between involved and invested. And that's the category that I think most parents can thrive or win in if we think in terms of that category. And that's the category that we label engaged. So in other words, you've got an involved parent who comes to your church or whose kids come to your church. Then you've got an invested parent. Somewhere between involved and invested, there's this huge step. And we say every parent can do something more. They can move from being involved to doing something related to your strategy, something related to a kid's life and engaging with them in a way they haven't been before. And by that term, we mean they're moving from simply being involved in your church to being engaged every week with their kid at some level in some way. In other words, the parent who has never prayed with their 5th or 6th grade son or daughter, because of your influence, may start praying once a week with them. Now, as small of a step as that seems to be, they've moved from involved to engaged, and that one thing, that one act, can be one of the most profound things that happens in that family or that kid's life or that parent's life, as they kind of engage spiritually and take the first step there. So your goal, to just be clear, is not to get every parent to be in the invested bucket, but to get every parent to become more engaged, because small steps can make a huge, big difference in your ministry. And if you try to push every parent to be invested, you'll overwhelm them maybe, and you may even disillusion yourself, because as a leader, it's going to be discouraging when you realize how many parents are all over the spectrum. And the other thing I would say that I think is related to this is that if your church is healthy, it will always have parents all over the spectrum.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be reaching parents at every level and every stage.
Yeah.
If you only had invested parents, I would think your church is kind of weird, because you're not reaching a lot of parents that either don't come, or a lot of parents ultimately that aren't connected or involved in other ways. So, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's such a good point, and I think encouraging for folks who maybe see a lot of parents who are, as you say, aware, and that's it, but perhaps that's actually a sign of being a healthy church.
Yeah.
In thinking about these 4 levels, aware, and I wrote them down, I'm taking notes, aware, involved, engaged, and invested. How does a youth leader move forward with these 4 categories? Do you train your small group leaders to know how to kind of individually work with parents? Do you encourage parents to think about, here's a menu of ways for you to connect with your kids, choose the ones that best fit you? Once you have this framework, what does it mean for how you interact with and communicate with parents?
Well, I think it's great to have a creative meeting as a team and go, how do we help aware parents outside and inside our church become more involved?
Yeah.
That would be specifically, are there strategies in your church as a team that you can put together to capture the imagination of parents who don't attend but whose kids attend? And what are some things you can do? Is that a sticky family workshop? Is that some type of event that you can do? Is it some kind of a gathering? And we'll talk about some of those in a minute. But I think it's always great to understand the characteristics of each category, because you're sitting around as a team and you're going, okay, what can we do to get the parents who are involved, who come, to kind of own a piece of the strategy? Yeah. Is it something we do every Sunday when they show up, where we hand them a piece so they can go home and have a discussion about it? Is it that we spotlight a series that we feel like is very family friendly that we're doing for our students twice a year, and we get the parents kind of on board by bringing them in and talking to them about the same thing we're talking to the students about at the same time? And then I would take a circle, and I would circle the engaged word, because I think that word is where most of the potential in most churches are.
Yeah.
And understand that even within that word, there's a wide spectrum of what it would look like for a different parent to engage more. Because I think that, again, we define spiritual leadership, I think, for years in the church as something that felt impractical or impossible for the average dad or the average mom. And so I love it when churches sit down and they redefine spiritual leadership so they can basically stand up in front of a parent who already feels responsible for the moral and spiritual formation of their kid and say, here's what it means to be a spiritual leader, and define that in a term that's very practical and possible, so that dad or mom can go, oh, I can do that. Because being a spiritual leader as a parent could just be connecting with your kid's small group leader. It could just be making sure your son or daughter is getting in a good small group or showing up on Sunday afternoon. Or it could be having a discussion, around a series that the church is doing with your son or daughter in a 10 or 15-minute discussion every week. So I think giving them handles as parents to understand how to engage is huge. And then take the invested circle.
Yeah.
And go, okay, if these are the 20% of parents who get it and who get it really deeply, how can I leverage them to lead small groups with other parents? How can I leverage them to invest in other parents to help them move a little closer, to where we want them to be?
That's great, and that certainly helps for those leaders who, like you said earlier, aren't parents yet. And so to partner with parents in engaging with parents, that's a beautiful vision. Reggie, I think probably one of the top questions or maybe complaints that we get here at FYI about parents is youth leaders who say, I plan parent events, I send out parent communication, and it just seems like parents aren't even reading it, they're not attending, or, the 10 to 20% of parents who do read or do attend are probably the parents who are already invested, those heavily engaged parents, and maybe the ones who kind of least need some of that training. So as you've worked with churches nationwide, what other practical ways have you seen leaders and churches connect with parents who are in the early stage of those 4 steps, that aware level?
Well, one of the things that I think is important to think in terms of when you're trying to create some type of a gathering for parents as an event is to start realizing that only a certain percentage of your parents will come. You can raise that percentage if you do 2 or 3 things. One is if you actually communicate to your parents through the small group leaders, if you would actually give them another reason to come besides just the information you're going to give them. For example, they get to meet the small group leader who is leading their son or daughter. If you do a better job of marketing, sometimes I don't think we build the need well enough with parents. If you build the event around what I would consider to be a critical stage or phase of life, like for example, at North Point just a few weeks ago, we did a gathering for parents of 9th graders. Well, there's a high felt need with parents of 9th graders. Their kids are shifting from middle school to high school, and most of those parents are still in the early part of the teenage years, and so they're still kind of willing and energetic and passionate about, I want to be involved with this, what does it look like? So I think you play to that. I think you play to those felt needs. And so we did a presentation, and we called the presentation, it sounds a little kind of somber, but we called the presentation The Last 200 Weeks. So we could basically say to the parent, okay, you've got 200 weeks left with your son or daughter before they graduate, and we want to tell you what we feel like are going to be the critical moments in these next 4 years, and how we're going to play and what we want you to do with us. And just simply a marketing message like that at a felt need, I think, gets parents in the door. But then you still need to assume. You still need to assume that most of the parents that need to be there may not show up, so you have to have a plan or strategy to take that same principle or that same content and hand it off to those parents in a way that they'll receive it. So I think in terms of doing that, it's important to take the content, put it in a podcast, put it in video, put it in materials, and then decide what point of distribution. Is it when parents drop their kids off, because 9th grade kids still aren't driving at a Sunday afternoon program, so you hand them that material that they missed. So you try to do what you can to get that material to them. I think one of the best ways, and this would be a second thing that I think I've discovered in churches over the last several years, is literally start building a connection between your small group leader and your parent. I think one of the most powerful things that we don't use as student leaders and student pastors is the relationship that the small group leader has with a small circle of teenagers, and to leverage that, since they're already on the front lines with those kids and those families, to build a bridge to the parent. Those small group leaders hold the keys to a lot of conversations and a lot of information that I think the parent wants to know and the parent needs to know. So I would encourage churches to do everything they can to get kids or get small group leaders and parents connected. When we build a job description for a small group leader, in every small group leader's job description there's a phrase that says partner with parents. So we're communicating to small group leaders, this is part of your role. When we talk to the parent about their job description, in every parent's job description we have a phrase, widen the circle. So we're saying you need another adult in the life of your kid. And so we're saying to both sides at the same time, you need to be in a relationship. And because the future of the kid, the faith of the kid is kind of connected to you getting on the same page together. So those would be 2 things that I would say right off the top of my head that I think are important in getting people to those kind of events and those things.
Wow, just fantastic, Reggie. I'm sitting here thinking, I wish I had known this when I was starting in youth ministry. So I love how you've taken this theory of the church and family partnering together and just given us some ways that we can move forward on it this month. And I know part of why we wanted to do this podcast now, part of why you do the Orange Tour in the fall, part of why we're releasing the book, The Sticky Faith Guide for Your Family, as well as a new video curriculum on Sticky Faith for Parents, is because, as the school year is starting up, this is such a great window to think more about that church-family partnership. So thanks for the very practical ideas you've given us today, Reggie.
No problem. Thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about Reggie's work, you can go ahead and search for Orange, as well as check out and see if there's a tour city coming near you. And also to find out more about Sticky Faith, including hundreds of free resources, check out stickyfaith.org. So thank you for investing time not only in young people, but in their families. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.